The first ever 12-team college football playoff bracket is here, and we have quite the field to break down. I'm Marisa Flores from NCAA Digital, joined by Stan Becton. Stan, the regular season and conference championship games gave us plenty of drama, but now we know who's in and who's out, so let's get into it. First, we have to talk about the biggest storylines coming out of this reveal. Alabama is out for the first time in this new format. How big of a deal is this, though, for the Tide and for college football?
I think it's a huge deal for Alabama. They missed out on the playoff, even though they had better wins. So that's going to be something that, as this 12-team playoff continues in future years, they're going to just continue to think about it. Well, hey, well, if we lose these games, it doesn't really matter who we beat because we have more losses. So that's something that's going to really hold weight, I think, as the rest of this bracket goes, because this was the first one. So now they have a template to go off of, and teams know what to look for throughout the regular season.
And how about SMU? The Mustangs made it to the title game only on a last second field goal in that ACC title game, of course. So, what do you think about SMU?
I think that's great for SMU to be able to hold on to that last spot in the playoff as an at large team, especially considering that they're not being penalized for losing their conference championship game, which was a big discussion all week long. What would happen if they were to lose that game? And I think because they lost on the last second, they made it in. I think if you would have asked the committee to rank this team after the third quarter, they might be out. But since it's 4 quarters of football and they fought back hard, I think they earned their spot in the playoff.
Absolutely. SMU was a big conversation starter, but we can't forget about Clemson, the ACC champs, of course. They had a tough regular season, but they punched their ticket finally. Does this prove that conference championships still carry weight?
It does prove that, and I love it because it shows that no matter how your season goes, if you can make it to that conference championship game, you'll still have a chance. And I think that keeps the regular season interesting throughout the entirety, especially as these playoffs get longer from that 4 teams to 12 teams. There's more games, but now the regular season still matters because you have to win your games to get to that conference championship game because anything can happen, as Clemson just proved.
Of course, and we saw how that bracket played out. Now let's move on to the bracket. We can start with the top four conference champs who earned those, coveted buys. Number one, Oregon, they're the only unbeaten team in the field, and Big Ten champs, of course. They've been dominant all season, but they might have drawn the toughest path. Number two, Georgia, they're SEC champs after an overtime win over Texas. Number three, Boise State made it. And finally, number four, Arizona State, they're the Big 12 champs and our surprise story of the season, of course. So do you think these teams that secured the coveted buys, do you think any of them have an easy path to the title game? And if so, which one?
Yeah, I would look at a team like a Georgia and Georgia's path to the title game. I know they would have to face the winner of Indiana or Notre Dame, but Georgia has really shown itself in those big games to really step up to the plate. You look at how they played Texas both of those times, and I think Texas is probably, and the committee thinks so as well with these rankings, that Texas is a better team than Notre Dame, and they beat them twice. So I think that could be an interesting matchup. And then another one that could get kind of interesting for another team is a Boise State because if Boise State gets an SMU or Penn State, and of course Penn State is a top 10 team, but Penn State also hasn't beat a ranked team in the top 10 yet this season. So that could play well into Boise State's favor because Boise State has played an Oregon team and lost. So they're on an even playing field in a little bit, depending how you look at it.
And that loss to Oregon from Boise State, it wasn't drastic either. It was pretty close. Let's talk about those first round matchups, though, that are all being hosted on campuses. Number five seed Texas, they're hosting number 12 Clemson in a classic big name battle for their first ever meeting. And number six Penn State, they're hosting number 11 SMU, who barely made the field after that heartbreaker. And they'll get their chance, of course, in Happy Valley now. Number seven, Notre Dame, though, they're hosting number 10, Indiana. And finally, number eight, Ohio State, hosting number nine, Tennessee. So the winner of that game, though, they're facing Oregon in the Rose Bowl, of course. But which first round game do you think has the most potential for an upset?
Clemson over Texas. I think Clemson, they have a lot of momentum right now. Even though they lost to South Carolina, that game was only a 3 point loss. But Clemson, they just have a lot of momentum after that game winning field goal. They feel like the season is going on for them and it's their year. All of the stars are aligning for them. And then they play a Texas team that faces a Quinn Ewers and an Arch Manning battle that still goes on, and fans are still wondering who's going to play. There's still anytime Quinn Ewers messes up, is it Arch Manning's time to play? That's still a discussion that goes on. But I think Clemson is one of those teams that could go into Austin and potentially win. They've already faced a Georgia team, so they have a common opponent, easy film to watch to see how both teams match up to each team. So I think that would be a game I would look at for an upset the most.
You mentioned Arch Manning, and he certainly still has a chance to make potential in this bracket. But speaking of the bracket, let's look ahead to these paths and what that national, official championship may look like. Oregon may be the top seed, but they could face Ohio State again, as we saw in the quarterfinals, and possibly Georgia or Boise State in the semis. Does this kind of feel like the group of, madness or death for the Ducks?
It does. I mean, that's a lot for them to do. They have to beat an Ohio State team potentially that they only beat by 1 point, or they have to beat a Tennessee team that beat that same Ohio State team. So that's not going to be an easy matchup. And then if they advance to the semifinal, then I think I'm not going to count out Arizona State all the way, but I'm going to count them out right now for this projection. They will have to face either a Clemson or a Texas, which also won't be an easy semifinal game for them. So I think it will be a little bit more challenging compared to you look at a team on the other side of the bracket, a Georgia. If they win, they might have to face a Boise State, who's the highest seed on that other side. So it's a lot harder for that one seed this year.
You mentioned Georgia. They've been tested all season, especially in that last game in terms of Beck getting injured. And like you mentioned, they'll likely meet Boise State or even Texas. How do you like their odds, though, to make it back to the title game?
I like Georgia's odd on that side of the bracket. I mean, you look at teams Indiana, Notre Dame, SMU, Penn State, Boise State. On that side of the bracket, none of those teams have the depth of talent that Georgia has. So we saw Carson Beck get hurt and Gunnar Stockton come in. Gunnar Stockton is a 4-star, 5-star quarterback as a backup. And behind Stockton, if Stockton gets hurt, another 5-star can come in. So that's how it is at every position at Georgia. And when you're going through this long playoff run, Georgia has a bye to get healthier. Now they'll have more depth for the teams who play a week prior than them coming into town. So they'll have a bye, more depth. They'll be well rested, and then they have just better skill players. So I think that could come into their favor. I think Georgia, if they don't make the title game this year, it's got to be a disappointment over in Athens.
Georgia certainly has a lot of depth. And speaking of disappointments, I mean, we touched on Alabama. I'm sure the tide is feeling pretty low right now. But you know who's not feeling low, Stan? Us, because it's time for our favorite segment, rapid fire questions. And of course, you know the rules. You have 15 seconds or less per answer. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, first off, does SMU prove their spot in the playoff with a win over Penn State?
I think with the win they would, and I think even if they keep it close, they'll show that okay, we belonged.
Okay, which first round host is on upset alert? Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, or Ohio State?
I think Texas should be on upset alert the most, but I also would say Ohio State. They have a very good Tennessee team that can run the ball with Dylan Sampson.
All right, and which player could make the biggest impact in the first round?
Ooh, biggest impact in the first round. I think you have to go with Curtis Rourke of Indiana, the quarterback. I think if he can have a big day, they might be able to knock off Notre Dame in that in-state battle.
Hot take there. All right, and does Boise State have a legitimate chance to maybe take the title game?
I think they have a legitimate chance. They have Ashton Genty, who I think will be top two in the Heisman. I don't know if he's going to win the Heisman. I'm not going to. This is not a Heisman video, but I think Ashton Genty can be one of those guys that just take over a game because he's done it with loaded boxes all season long. So I think he could be the guy who carries them to a title game.
That one may have been close to 15 seconds, but it's okay because we also touched on Heisman stuff. So, two for one there. And lastly, who benefited the most from this new 12-team format?
I think the team that benefited the most is Notre Dame because in other years, Notre Dame without a conference championship, I don't know if they make the playoff. But this year, they get to be in the playoff and host a game. So I think they benefited the most.
That's true. This new format really shook things up for us, and those upsets that we had during the regular season made it even more of a wild journey for us. But so far, that wraps our reaction to the first 12-team college football playoff bracket. It's certainly a promising field with some big storylines, so we can't wait to follow all the action. Stay tuned to ncaa.com, of course, for all your college football updates, and we'll see you next time.